Okie dokie, good to see you all again. We lost the sun. Anywho. Okay. As you look up and see the picture of this beautiful black man on February 1st, is there a reason why I might be showing you this picture? Does anybody know? Have an idea? Mr. Sullivan. It is African American, aka Black History Month. And so for the next several classes, I'm going to be talking about some religious figures. It is world history, so it is a world history. World religions, it is a religious class. So I'm going to talk about some religious figures from American Catholic history. These are Black American Catholics who are on their way to sainthood in the Catholic Church. Let's hope, eventually. And I thought I would start out with this gentleman known as Pierre Toussaint, or more appropriately, Venerable Pierre Toussaint. Venerable Pierre Toussaint. Now, you have to understand the process for declaring a saint in the Catholic Church, because it is an extensive process that takes quite a bit of time. There are 4 stages. The lowest stage is when they open the investigation into someone. They think that they have someone who is a very holy person, a very good person, who could possibly be declared a saint eventually. And so a diocese, a local area of church governance called a diocese with a bishop, or a religious group or religious order of monks or nuns or whatever, might have a case opened with the Vatican or within their diocese or area for a certain person to investigate. And they would look at the person's life and they would investigate any writings the person might have left behind to see if they were a good and holy person. Did they write some kooky things, or were their writings kosher? Were they okay? Were they orthodox, correct, and stuff like that? So the beginning of this investigation, when it's opened, the person is able to be called the servant of God. So that's the lowest level. So servant of God, John Doe or Jane Doe or whatever, when they open the investigation. The next level, after they do their investigation and they believe that the person has the person's life demonstrated heroic virtue or the practice of the Christian religion to an exceptional or remarkable degree, then the person, and they've decided that and determined that, then the person can be declared venerable, which means honorable. It's just another term for honorable, which means the person can start being honored more publicly in the church. They're still not a saint, but they're probably a saint. They're on that spectrum of sainthood, and so they're honored as venerable. And that's where the gentleman we have up here is, that's where he's located in the spectrum, Pierre Toussaint. He's venerable. Then what you're waiting for, because most of the work, by the time a person's declared venerable, most of the work in the investigation has been done. What you're waiting for is a supernatural proof, some kind of proof from God. You're waiting for a miracle. You're waiting for something supernatural to happen that can confirm that, yes, you can move to the next level. So if someone has a cancerous tumor that mysteriously disappears and the doctors can't explain it by scientific or medical means, and the person was praying to this person, there has to be a causal connection. It can't just be, oh, I lost my cancer and I'll say it, Pierre Toussaint did it. There has to be some kind of connection, like, the person was saying prayers to Pierre Toussaint, had a picture of Pierre Toussaint and was praying to him and asking Pierre to pray for the removal of the cancer, and that exactly happens. Okay, that's an indicator. And at that point, if that miracle is confirmed, you become a blessed. You can be declared a blessed. And then you're waiting for another miracle to confirm. And if that is confirmed, then the church can choose to raise you to the highest level, which is canonization, as a saint. And then you're officially a saint, which means that you can be publicly venerated in the church. It does not mean that, there aren't saints. It does not mean that someone is not a saint if they're not declared a saint. There may have been and probably were very many good and holy people that were very saintly people, and you could have classified it officially as a saint that the church just didn't know about. it's kind of look at canonization of a person as a saint kind of as like the church's equivalent to the Hall of Fame. Okay, these are people that you want to kind of imitate and idealize in the practice of the Christian faith. So that's what's going on there. It doesn't mean that if you're not declared a saint, or if your mother or father wasn't declared a saint, but you knew them and that they were very holy people and probably went straight to heaven when they died, then you may have known a living saint, but the church might not know that person. It doesn't mean the person wasn't a saint or not worthy of it. It's just this official process. And usually the people who become saints become them because they have a lot of, the promoters of their cause have a lot of resources. So you see a lot of monks and nuns and priests who get declared saints, and not so many lay people, normal Catholics like Pierre Toussaint. Okay, why? Well, because the monks and nuns and priests and bishops, they have dioceses behind them. They have religious orders, that can push the cause, especially if the person was a member of the religious order, they have some oomph and they can push the cause through in Rome, whereas someone like Venerable Pierre probably just has a promoter, I'm sure, of his cause in Rome, an official promoter, but maybe just has volunteers who are working to try and get him moved up the rung of sainthood. So it usually takes some time because for people who are not like in the church hierarchy, in the church officialdom, to move up the rung. Nevertheless, I think he was a saint, and I hope one day he will be officially declared a saint, but right now he's a venerable, so I venerate him. Pierre Toussaint, he was born in 1766, and he died in 1853. He was born as a slave in Haiti, which is a Caribbean nation. If you look at the Caribbean islands, there's a big island called Santo Domingo, and on that island there are two countries. One is called Haiti, and one is called the Dominican Republic. He was born on the side which Haiti was on, so he's Haitian by, I guess you'd say, ethnicity and birth. And in 1787, he was brought by his owners to New York City. His owners were a French family called the Berard family, husband and wife. And they moved to New York City, so he came along. And he trained as a hairdresser and was apparently pretty good at it. He became the most successful hairdresser in New York City, this gentleman, and because people who got their hair professionally dressed were usually people who had money, he was, rubbing elbows with people in high society, powerful people, rich people, even though he was a slave, technically. And I know this is New York City, but you have to remember this is the 1700s, early 1800s, so slavery wasn't necessarily just an issue in the South. After Mrs. Berard's her husband died, Mrs. Berard's husband died, and the Berard family also lost their sugar plantation that they owned down in Haiti. There was a revolt. There were a lot of slave revolts in Haiti, and there was a revolt that took away their sugar plantation where they were getting income from. And so Pierre supported Mrs. Berard and her new husband, she remarried, on his income. I mean, he's actually doing pretty well from his income as a hairdresser. And he supported her out of Christian charity to help her out. In 1807, Mrs. Berard finally died, and Pierre Toussaint received his freedom from slavery. He never bought, he had the money, but he never bought his own freedom. He was married to a woman, I believe her name was Juliet, and he bought her freedom from slavery, and he bought other blacks' freedom from slavery, but he never bought his own for some reason. I don't know why. But with the death of Mrs. Berard, he was given his freedom, so he wasn't a slave anymore. He supported orphan schools for black children, and he also helped found the first French church in New York City. Remember, Haiti was colonized by France, and it's still the official language of Haiti, although most people speak, the national language is really Haitian Creole, which is based on French. Very interesting language. I wish I could speak it. But anyways, And so they had, like, at that time, they had a lot of national churches, national Catholic churches. So they would have a French church, a Polish church, an Irish church. And these would be churches where people could go to and speak their language and practice their cultural heritage, and, as well as, of course, worshiping as Catholics. And he established the first French church in New York City for that, or like that, I should say. He was a hairdresser to the wife of Nathaniel Fish Moore, who, and this kind of tells you the kind of high society people he was hanging out with. He was a hairdresser to the wife of this man who was the president of Columbia University, famous university in New York City, who was also an amateur photographer. And that's when we have Nathaniel Fish Moore to thank for our photograph, actual photograph of this man, Pierre Toussaint, who's sitting at a table. Could look happier, I guess. You're a saint, crack a smile, baby. You know. It's anyways, I don't know. Anyway, but still great. Anywho, so this is an actual picture or photograph of him, our only photograph that we have of him. He was actually a neighbor and a friend of Nathaniel Fish Moore, the president of Columbia University. In 1991, the Archdiocese of New York, where he died, opened the cause for him to be declared a saint, and so that's when he became declared a servant of God. And in 1996, Pope St. John Paul II declared him venerable, and that's kind of where it has stayed for the last 30-some years. I don't know why it hasn't proceeded faster or to the other level. I'm not sure why. I hope it does. But at this point, he's at the venerable stage. And so I asked Venerable Pierre Toussaint for his prayers, not only on Black Catholics, that would bless them in their life as Catholics, but bless all of us in this class, that we will do well, that I'll teach the class well, hopefully, and that you will all do well in the course and get good grades. Amen. Mr. Pratt. Mr. Pratt. There. One second. Let's make sure I got everybody. I think I did. Mr. Pratt's here, and nobody else over here. Okay, good. Okay. Sent out an email about that. Yes. Okay. If you look on Canvas, I have put up the topics for the paper number 1. And for the first discussion board. With paper number 1, I gave you, I put the document in Canvas under the modules. You can find the PDF file, but I also attached the PDF file to the announcement that's on Canvas for the paper, which is just a handout of various definitions by thinkers and intellectuals about religion. Okay, you don't have to know who these people are. If you do, that's great. But I just wanted to give you some food for thought as you're thinking about the question. I want you to talk about your own idea of what religion is, and can you defend that idea and explain that idea. But also I want to give you some food for thought and help you think, get the juices flowing by having you look at what some other intellectuals have said about religion and defined religion as. So take a look at that. And the discussion board. I've never used Canvas. Honestly, I've never used Canvas for a discussion board before, so I'm not sure how it's going to work out. I tried to look at it through Student View to see what it is, but for me, Canvas is garbage. I wish we didn't have it, but you got what you got. So we'll see how it can be. So it might work, but it might be a disaster. You know what I'm saying, Mr. Watkins? So we'll see what happens. Hopefully, I set it up to work, so hopefully it'll work and people can make threads and responses or whatever. But, even with Student View, I couldn't really figure out, okay, what is this going to actually do? It's not very helpful at all, but it is set up. Okay, and remember that tomorrow is quiz number 1. So you will, at 6 p.m., the quiz will be available, and then you'll have the next week until the end of Friday, the week from this Friday, to get it done. So please remember that. Alrighty. finishing up talking about the Catholic Church and other religions, I was going to talk about this statement from Pope St. John Paul II. Skip over that. Here we are. Who was Pope from 1979 until 2005? Quite a long time. I don't know if he was the longest one to reign before he died. I think that might have been Pope Pius IX, Leo XIII. Well, I forget. I should have looked it up. But anyways, it was a long time that he reigned as Pope. And no, that picture is not Photoshopped. That's actually him having a good time for himself. It's good to be the Pope, you know? Got the, the nuns making you cioppino and cardinals rubbing your feet after a long day as Pope, It's like the deacons rubbing your back, A little to the left, deacon. It's good to be the Pope. Having some fun. Anyways, and I asked you to read, please, a brief talk, an audience, as they call it, an address he gave to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is called, let's see here. Ooh, Ms. Dennis. What is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith now called today? It's not called that anymore. They changed one word. Don't know? Who does? Who wants to take a crack at it? Oh, Ms. Belser, hello. Who wants to take a crack at it? I wrote it on the board. No, I think you know too much. Put your hand down. You read too much. You're sitting there thinking, this is university. That's not the purpose. It's supposed to be having fun, Mr. Pratt. You also know too much. You listen. I can tell you're listening to me. Stop doing that. Well on the quiz. Let's see. Yes, Ms. Purnell?
Sarcastic?
Excellent, Ms. Purnell. Did you get that from your notes?
Yeah, I was like that.
Why are you taking notes? I know, I am a boring guy. Sorry about that. I ramble. Dicastery. It's called the dicastery, which is just a fancy word for a bureaucratic office, okay? Dicastery. So now they know why they couldn't just keep it called this congregation. I don't know, but Pope Francis wanted to update it. Now it's called the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. Okay. What is the purpose of the congregation or the dicastery? It is to defend the faith, to explain the faith on behalf of the Pope. Of course, the Pope is the ultimate authority because he's the Bishop of Rome and the head of the Vatican City. So it participates in the teaching authority, the magisterium of the Pope of Rome, and assists him in kind of adjudicating theological issues. It might have to issue warnings on teachings in certain books or something that are going out amongst Catholics that they have to be aware that this is not the official teaching of the church or it's kind of wrong or whatever. Other times they answer questions that people might have about the faith and stuff like that. So they issue a lot of documents, and they were working on a document at the time that the Pope was addressing in this talk that he gave. And as I told you, I was giving you some background on the talk. People, from the generally positive view that started with Vatican II back in the 1960s, which was kind of overturning the almost persistently negative view of the world's religions that seemed to be apparent in the Catholic Church, people got the opposite impression. Whereas before Vatican II, people might have gotten the impression that, if you're not a baptized Catholic, you're not saved. You're all going to hell, okay? And any goodness or truth that we seem to find in these religions, well, they probably just come from the devil or deceptions of demons or something like that. People assume that. The Catholic Church never actually taught that, but that was an assumption that people had, okay? And so, and it was really a wrong assumption that had to be kind of corrected at Vatican II. However, people kind of went the opposite direction of saying, well, because we can acknowledge that there are truthful things said by non-Christians and non-Catholics, and there are good and virtuous people in other religions, and it even seems to be due to the practice of their religion. So religions seem to have some kind of positive impact and force on people, even if they're non-Christian religions. Well, all religions must be true, and you don't really need to believe in Jesus, or you don't need to be baptized and truly enter into his community. And so that kind of concerned Pope St. John Paul II. So he wanted to address that. Actually, he wanted the CDF to address it, and they did in a document they issued later, which I'm not going to get into. But because I think that this address to the CDF is kind of the basis for that document. So what does he say? He says that some have tried to say that Jesus Christ is not unique, that he's just one Savior amongst other revealers or saviors. And another point that he addresses that some people are, and these are Catholic theologians, he's not talking about outsiders, he's talking about people who are saying they're Catholic teachers of the faith or thinkers of the faith, and they're teaching these things. Jesus is not unique. And also that belonging to the church is not necessary for salvation. Belonging to Christ's community. Belonging to the church is necessary because Jesus willed it. That's why. It's not like a power play, like, you have to believe in the church to believe in Jesus. You can believe in Jesus, but Jesus founded a community which he told people, or gave a means for people to join. Okay? Jesus was very formal about that. As, we'll find out when we talk about the Christian religion. But the Pope disagrees with those views. He says, on the contrary, God's revelation in Jesus Christ is definitive, it is the standard, and it is complete. It's not lacking in anything. It's finished. That doesn't mean that the revelation in Jesus Christ tells people everything about everything. Okay, it's like having a cup, like my cup of coffee. If you ask me, it's not full anymore, but, my cup was full of coffee. Oh, yeah, it's full of coffee. But it's not, totally, it's full in the context of being in the size of this cup. And if I had a smaller cup and it were up to the brim, then it would be full too. That would both be true. Or if there's a bigger cup and it was full up to the brim, it would be full. Okay, so Jesus teaches the truth about salvation within the context of us, human beings, what we can understand, what we're able to know through our human reason about God and about the world. And this applies to any of our knowledge. Even scientific knowledge. Our knowledge of the universe that we have through the natural sciences is only as good as our instruments. 200 years ago, we didn't have great instruments. But then someone invented a microscope. And we could start seeing single-cell organisms. Ooh, that surprised people. There's these little things that you can't see, And we started inventing bigger telescopes so we could look out into space. And we started sending things into space. Okay, the technology develops, our instruments become better, and we know more about the universe. Astronomers still say we only know about maybe 20% of the universe. So there's 80% that we don't know or can't see. And there's some parts of the universe that we can never see. We just don't, just the way we're angled in our galaxy, there's no possibility of us seeing those parts of the universe at all, no matter what instruments we have. So he counters what these Catholic theologians are saying by reminding them of, really the faith. Okay? So let me go on to that. Oh, that's Redemptoris Missio. Whoop, pass over that. Sorry. There we are. So in number 3, which hopefully you've read by now, it'll appear on the quiz, I think. He says, humanity's religions are not complements to God's revelation in Christ. Does that mean that God cannot speak to people through other religions? No, he's not saying that at all. He's not saying that God cannot reveal truths to people that they then kind of make concrete in the religions of humanity. But the difference is that they're not revealed by God and intended by God in the definitive way that his revelation in Jesus is. So they're not complements in that way to Jesus. Like, the god Shiva from Hinduism is equal to Jesus. Because from the Catholic perspective, the god Shiva doesn't even exist. Certainly not God. Jesus exists. So the theory that Christ's revelation will be limited or complemented, supplemented by other religions, like Jesus and Buddhism, or Christianity and Buddhism, Although you can talk about these things and compare them, and people do, theologians do, but to say that the truth of, say, Buddhism is on the same level, or the Buddha is on the same level of Jesus, he says is contrary to the faith of the church. Which, I mean, I guess in a sense makes sense, because otherwise you're kind of committing existential suicide for your religion. What's the purpose of Jesus? Why the question becomes, why believe in him if he's just one amongst many saviors? Why give a particular, what's what I'm looking for, specific allegiance to him? What draws a person to him? Is he just an interesting figure? Well, there are a lot of interesting figures in religions, all religions. That's what makes them interesting figures. They do interesting things. But because the thing that differentiates Jesus from the Pope's viewpoint and from the viewpoint of the Catholic Church is that Jesus is God himself. So God is the source of this information. He alone can truly say what the truth about God is. God can say, no, I'm one God. I'm not 3 different gods or 1,000,000 different gods. Okay, you can clarify. You can say, no, there's only one God and I'm it. Well, then how do you work Jesus into that paradigm? If you got God and then you got Jesus, and Jesus is also God. Well, we'll talk. We'll talk about that when we get to the Trinity for Christianity, how they come up with that. So God is not ambivalent or unbiased about the truth or where the good life lies. I mean, and this applies to a lot of religions. Not all religions care about truth in the same way. Okay, so this is mainly a Christian concern, and also say maybe concern of Judaism and Islam. These related religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, kind of have this viewpoint of truth, having the correct view of reality. But other religions like Buddhism or Hinduism might not necessarily care so much about that question. Just so you know, that might not be their viewpoint. But for the Catholic Church, it is that there is a truth, and that there is a good life. But how do you get the good life? What's the best way to get the good life? To achieve it, can you achieve it in other lesser ways? Yes. But the question is there a way that's the most fulfilling? And for the Catholic Church, it would say that lies in Jesus, the Son of God. And if you have a God who knows what the truth is, he can tell you, he can reveal to you that, yes, this is the right path to get to me. Doesn't mean there aren't other paths. There might be other searches that people are on, which God can maybe accept in a certain manner of speaking, or tolerate, if you want maybe a more negative kind of connotation, but I don't mean it in a negative connotation, but just accept, these are the tools that the person has to work with. So okay, they're still on their journey to me, but ultimately this is the path that will lead you more straightly to me, I guess you could say. So John Paul II can say in his talk, the followers of non-Christian religions are in an unsatisfactory situation. If you want to look at their situation there, what's going on there? Your computer is about to restart. No, it's not. Is an unsatisfactory situation. And this statements like this kind of rub people the wrong way. They thought, well, are we returning to the pre-Vatican II view of, a negative view of other religions? And I would say, the word can be interpreted in that way, but another way might be to say that while these religions fulfill human beings and fulfill this need that people have for truth, for beauty, for goodness, and they can certainly, according to the teaching of Vatican II, lead people even to salvation and to the presence of God, such that as long as people don't put obstacles in the way. He's talking again from a Christian perspective. Jesus is the standard for how Christians relate to God. And so he is the most satisfactory way for approaching God. Is there anything more I want to say about this? Okay, I talked about that. A connected point, and we'll learn this when we talk about, we'll learn more about this in depth when we talk about Christianity and what Jesus did. And Jesus, Christianity is considered a founder religion, sociologically speaking. Means it's very simply that it has a founder, it has a person that you can look to, or group of people, but usually a person that you can look to as the source or the origin of the group that comes after. So, without Jesus Christ, you don't have Christianity. He's the founder, okay? He starts this movement, which then continues historically. Same thing with Islam. Although I know, from the perspective of a Muslim believer, that Islam is eternal. It goes even into the presence of, goes back to God himself. And Muhammad is just repeating and reciting the revelation which has eternally existed. Nevertheless, from an historical perspective or a religious studies perspective, no one was talking about Islam until the 7th century AD when this dude Muhammad showed up. So he's considered a founder. The Buddha would also be a founder. No Buddha, no Buddhism. It's even named after him, Buddhism. You usually know you have a founder religion when it's named after you. If it's not named after anybody, then it's not a founder religion. And there are religions like that. So we have like Judaism and we have Hinduism, which are so old, so ancient that we don't know where, if it comes from any particular person. It's more of a cultural thing. It arises out of their culture. So Jesus is a founder, and by founding, it means he found something, a movement. He specifically chooses members out of his own followers and gives them special powers and authority to do things like he's doing, to also interpret his message for other people, and he sends them out. Sends them out to preach his message. So we have this historical fact that it's not just Jesus, he has followers. And this is, not any different than other religions. Muhammad had the companions, and the Buddha had his followers, his disciples. So Jesus was no different. And they would go out and spread his message, and they had a certain authority to interpret it. This group is called the church, just a technical term for the community. This group is called the church. And to come to Jesus, you have to come through this community, because no religion is individual. No religion is individual that I know of. There's no religion of one. Maybe on the internet, there's some dude who's on YouTube or something like preaching his own religion and it's only meant for him. Possibly. But that's the exception. The rule is that just in any world religion, you have a community that you have to become a member of and go through in a way to get to even the founder. So the church exists, and it follows. And what God. That way it doesn't make any sense. I don't know why I wrote that down. There are other religions in the world. And even Jesus was aware of other religions surrounding him. Jesus interacted sometimes with non-Jews, so he knew there were other religious beliefs around him. But Jesus established his own group, which you could call the church, as a place where he wanted his salvation to be found. So it's not Jesus, and even with Jesus, he does not exist in a vacuum. It's not me and Jesus religion. Because it was never Jesus and just one person. It was Jesus and the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles he chose. Jesus and a whole group of women that followed him around, and other followers that followed him around. In his broader context of the Jewish religion that he was a part of. So it was never just Jesus alone. You were always part of a community. And it was this community that he wanted people to enter in order to show their faith in him. So other religions themselves are not on par with belonging to his church, because the church is united to Jesus himself. So it's not like, because some people might be like, I believe Jesus is God. He's God in the flesh. He's God's revelation to humanity. I accept that definitively. But the church, on the other hand, that's just a human institution, whatever. It is to a large extent a human institution, but if you're a Christian, you believe it's founded by a supernatural figure, so it's also a supernatural institution. It's a sacred institution. It's not just profane. Are there profane elements to it? Well, yeah. Even the Pope has to pay his bills. Even the Pope has the Vatican Bank, and has to drive around in a car and stuff like that. So there are profane elements to the religion, But if you believe in this, if you don't believe in this, then that's fine, but just listen to it because it'll help you on the quiz. It is still a supernatural reality if you believe that the origin of this community is a sacred source, i.e. Jesus. So even in that case, other religions, which from the Catholic Church's perspective are not founded per se or established by God, even though God might be interacting with people through the religions they create and they use, belief in Jesus, they're not on par with belonging to the church. Nevertheless, the church is going to have sincere respect for that search that people have, but it can't deny its belief that believing in Jesus and belonging to his community go together in some way. And that's what he says here in number 4. So if you look on the PowerPoint, I'm going over there, it's right here in front of me. Connected with the uniqueness of Christ's salvific mediation is the uniqueness of the church he founded. The word salvific is just a Latin word which means saving. Salus means saving. Salvific means saving. And mediation is a go-between. So there's a uniqueness not to Jesus, but a uniqueness to the church, which is connected to him because it was founded directly by him. He established it by him as a saving reality. The image used is, it's like his body on earth. It's like his continuing presence on earth, through which he accomplishes the salvation of humanity, because Jesus isn't around anymore. So you have an institution which continues his message and his work. And then he quotes from our reading, Lumen Gentium number 14, where it states officially that the church is necessary for salvation. Now, does that mean that it's necessary in the sense that someone who's not saved, not formally a member of the Catholic Church is damned or goes to hell or is not saved or whatever? No, it doesn't mean that. You should know that from your catechism reading when it talks about, well, a number of places in the catechism reading. You did it. And from the Vatican II readings, that God, in ways known to himself, can give people faith that leads them to salvation, but in ways known to God, not maybe known to the church or known to us, that are not revealed to us. Nevertheless, the community that Christ founded, or Jesus, because he is part of this salvific mediation or the salvific structure that God has instituted by salvific or saving, it just means bringing people into his presence of love for eternity. That's all it really is. A lot of theological jargon for a very simple reality, being happy with God for a reality, however that's going to be. I'm not there yet, so I don't know what it is. But I will tell you this, Ms. Balser, it better include an Indian buffet. Because if there's no Indian food in heaven, I know I'm not in heaven, Mr. Pratt. Bhajis, pakora, tikka masala. Oh, yes. Now, I think they have Indian buffets in hell, but the bhajis are all dry, and the naan bread is brittle and breaks apart. Anyways, so the church, necessary in the sense that it is somehow always, anyone who is saved is necessarily related to the church mysteriously. And there's some mysterious relationship going on supernaturally between this body of Christ and Christ himself and anyone who is saved. They're not saved without Christ or without the church in some way. Even if a person might have no connection to these things or no possible connection, like someone lived hundreds of years before Jesus or lived in Australia before the 1700s when they'd never seen a Christian, or the natives the Aborigines had never heard of the gospel or anything like that. There's no possibility of knowing about Jesus or joining something called a church. There is never, because it is a supernatural reality and hence transcendent, it overarches time and space and human history, they can have some kind of connection to it. Okay, so he also in number 4, the Pope condemns the view or criticizes the view that the church is a way of salvation just along other religions and that they're even complementary to the church. So Hinduism is a valid religion, it's a valid search for God, and has tons of wisdom and beauty in it. But it's not a way of salvation. It would not be viewed as a way of salvation, properly speaking. Although it may provide that for people who are following it. Okay. Oh, that last point. Excuse me, I don't want to miss that last point. Relativism. That all religions are relative, and one religion is as good as another. He rejects that point of view. Because ultimately, religion, kind of like philosophy in a way, is, at least from the Christian's perspective, is concerned with truth, how reality really is. Because how reality is, or we think it is, affects how we act. It's kind of a philosophical principle, but yeah, and so if you think of reality in a good way, or you think that reality is a certain way and it's accurate, then you act that way in the world. But if you have a distorted view of reality, then you act that way because that's how you think the world is. But if it's distorted, it can cause a lot of damage. You see this all the time in, say, for example, mental illness. A schizophrenic thinks that reality is a certain way, but if the person's paranoid schizophrenic and thinks that the people that he or she is meeting are out to undermine him or her, destroy him or her, and you have to violently react against that because they're going to kill you or something, and they come at you with a gun or a knife, and they just think they're defending themselves, but the reality is very different, okay? But they perceive that. That's a question, that can affect how you look. And it's the same way in how people view the world. If you think that if enslaving people, your enemies, people maybe you conquer in battle or something, and you have the right then to enslave them, if that's what you consider your truthful reality, or the truth of reality, or you view them as non-human beings or some kind of subhuman being that you can do, that affects how you treat them. You can do certain things to them that you wouldn't do to another full human being. Your view of reality, your view of truth affects what you do. So we want to know what the truth is. And what is the truth? What can we know from God's revelation? What can we say after reading all these things? Well, first of all, the general principle is that God, for the Catholic Church, is that God wishes all men and women to be saved, which means to be with him in eternity in happiness and peace. And this is where we can kind of place the quest that we find for humanity in religion. And this is addressed in Nostra Aetate, in the Declaration on the Church's relationship to non-Christian religions. The Church sees in those religions and other religions, and to some extent in Christianity herself, this questioning about what is the meaning of life, what is the purpose of suffering, what is the world, what is the human being, what's the nature of even a human being in the world. And religions are asking those questions. But from the Christian perspective, Christianity is the answer to that. That's why it's different from other religions, whereas other religions are kind of human quests, maybe even philosophical quests that are given a sacred clothing, if you will. Christianity is the response, believed to be the response, and also Judaism, as we'll see, because Christianity comes out of Judaism. It's predicated on the belief that Judaism is God's revelation as well, and it's true. Jesus was a Jew, and he comes out of Judaism. Christianity is the response that God gives to this already yearning of the human being for something, to these answers to these questions. Salvation, entering into God and happiness, comes through Jesus, his Son, especially by his death on the cross. So, of course, you see, like in Catholic institutions, they hang the cross or images of Jesus' death. Now, of course, the belief is Jesus rose from the dead, and his resurrection is the more important belief, that he didn't just die a tragic death, but it's an important image because it wants to remind us of what Jesus did on the cross by dying for sin and canceling out the debt in a way that we have towards God, which we could never repay. Jesus made acceptance of this salvation contingent on joining his group, which is called the church. Whether Jesus called it the church, we don't know, but later on it was given the word church. Okay, but his group and his church has a responsibility to make God's saving will known to the world. Oh, this is just another statement. Okay. To make his message known to the world. And it's a message. It's not something that people should be forced to accept. They can hear this message and accept it or not and judge it, it's a valid message or it's not a valid message, or it makes sense to them or not. But it is something that should be an offer to someone that they should accept within their freedom as human beings to accept them and not be forced to accept it. I already talked about this, that he quotes, this is again from our reading, Lumen Gentium, number 16, that if you seek God with a sincere heart, you can gain eternal life. However, this is where he says that they are even in their search for the truth of God, people who are not Christian are in an unsatisfactory situation, and he explains why, because they don't have the fullness of the means of salvation. It's fullness. It doesn't mean they don't have any means, that God might not be speaking to them in any way through their religions, that there might not, he's not saying there's no truth or holiness or goodness in their religions or in their search for God, but the fullness was found in Jesus and the means that he gave, the practices, the teachings Jesus gave, the practices that Jesus gave, but ultimately accepting the grace, accepting the help of God that he offers in Jesus through his dying on the cross for sin, and believing in his resurrection, his rising from the dead. This is from our reading from the Catechism. I don't think it was from the Catechism, but I'm giving it to you anyways. Number 28, where it talks about, I think it's important because it's in a brief way, it talks about what religion is and the view of religion. Does anyone want to read that from the Catechism, number 28? I got you, sir. Let's see. Ms. Benet, are you, Ms. Pennick, excuse me, are you raising your hand? Or
I was scratching.
You're scratching your hair? Could you be raising your hand?
I would get somebody else's hands.
Huh?
I would get somebody else's hands.
Okay. Let's see. What can we do? I lost somebody. Da, 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 da. What do you think? Let's see here. Ms. Scally, do you want to read something? Yes, no?
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You're on.
In many ways, brothers to counsel like give expression to the voice of God in the religious beliefs and behavior, and prayer, sacrifices, rituals, meditations, and so forth. These forms of religious expression, despite they often bring
ambiguities, yes.
They often bring with them are so universal that one may well call manic.
Good. Okay, number 28. So, it's a quest for God, a search for God, and human religions are searches for God, and expressions of that, okay? And what do they consist of? They consist of, and this is kind of, intuitive, I guess, there's no big revelation here, that they consist of beliefs people have and behaviors, beliefs and practices. Okay? Sometimes you'll come across the threefold definition that of religion as creed, code, and cult. This alliterative definition. You have the creed, you have what people believe, and then you have code and cult. The code, which would be like the moral code. Cult does not mean like, some crazy, cult, where you've got one leader who, mind controls everybody, whatever. No, cult comes from the Latin word, which means, worship. Religious worship, that's all it means. So you have worship. So you have the beliefs, the creed, the believing from credo, Latin to believe. Then you have the code, the moral code, and the cult, which are the ways you act, your ethics in daily life, and the way you worship, which is also behavior. Okay? So beliefs and behaviors, prayers, sacrifices, rituals addressed in chapter 1. Okay? That Robinson and Rodriguez talk about the 4 characteristics of ritual, which might appear in the quiz. So all these things of how people represent their search for God in very diverse ways, with all sorts of different interpretations. But they're ambiguous. The word ambiguous just means they're unclear, okay? They're unclear. That doesn't mean they're not necessarily beautiful or even true, but they're usually ambiguous. There are elements where you kind of pull back and say, well, that might be true, but that's a little weird. That's something that's unusual, or maybe not so much true about how the human person is or what we should do in the world. Nevertheless, these things are so universal in human culture that you could call the human person a religious being. It just seems to be built into us. Even if you don't believe in religion. I remember, the New Scientist magazine. I have a copy of that in of an article on my computer that sometimes I give out to class, not in this class, but in other classes I've given it out for reading, which is trying to explain the evolutionary origins of where religion might come from. Because even if you don't believe in it, you be opposed to religion in some ways, you still have to explain why it pops up so often amongst human beings. What are human beings looking for that they keep referring to this specific type of activity that we call religion? What benefit is it providing to human beings? Yep, there we go. All righty. So what do you think, Mr. Davey? Opinions? Questions? No, nothing? Opinions, questions, disagreements, inconsistencies, things that don't make sense, things that do make sense. What do you think? Do you think the Catholic Church's view of other religions, is a good one? Is it as searches for God? Do you think that's how the followers of those religions would explain what they're doing? Are there other religions that claim they have the truth? Or would challenge that you can even know the truth? That you know. What do you think? Do you think religion is just, all the religions are just one amongst the others? It's a grab bag to choose from one religion that fulfills you, or you take bits and pieces from all of them, like their philosophies? What do you think, Mr. Roslin? Where are we at? No? It's out there, right? It's out there in the world. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I guess just all of them out there, they have a lot of information that they're trying to come to the agreement of something that's so good. They're trying to do good things, I guess.
You think so? You think religion is trying to do it?
Not always. It's trying to do it.
Okay. Do you think that's the purpose of religion? What's the difference between, say, religion and philosophy? There seems to be a lot of overlap. They're both kind of looking for truth or how reality is. Philosophers also ask some of the big questions like, what is existence? They might talk about God. How do we know things? What is the nature of the human person, right? But they're not doing it in a religious way, right? Is that what religions are? They just kind of like philosophy with bells and whistles? What do you think?
I like the point of where you said religion rejects religious. I think
Okay.
Because I feel like there's kind of a point where everything else.
Okay. Or almost, yeah, it does seem logical from his point of view. I mean, if you're going to say all religions are on an equal level, why are you Christian? You know, as I said, what does Jesus do for you? Is it just you like guys with beards? We got to tell you his own, right? My God's happening. I could be a Hindu, because a lot of the Hindu gods have beards and big mustaches. But, you know, I don't know, just a guy with long hair, beard, speaks. Carries me when I'm on the beach. Carries me in his arms. That's my kind of dude. What do you disagree with? I mean, this some of this stuff. I mean, is not. I guess could be triggering for some people. I mean, if you're not a Christian and the Pope's telling you you're in an unsatisfactory situation because you don't believe in Jesus or something. What do you think?
What's your question?
What was my question? Well, what do you think about that point when he says that people who are not Catholic or not, he's presuming not Catholic, because I think Protestants not in the same boat as people of other religions, because Protestants believe in Jesus, but other people who don't believe in Jesus are in an unsatisfactory situation, salvation, speaking in the way of salvation, their connection to God. What do you think about that?
So, because this is kind of my let's see why they had like Christian blessings. I don't think.
Do you think he's implying that?
I feel like that's the case. I think he's not. If a person is not, don't believe, what you think they should. Like if you believe they should, whoever they believe in.
Fulfill how?
As a person, you know, sometimes, let's just say, for instance, you put your body sacrifice confide in information,
Sure, no, I
but
think
things
that
in the light of him, but you take it seriously. So I feel like in that instance, how is that? That's just their belief. That's from a judgment.
yeah, he's making a judgment. He could be, we could accuse him of being judgmental. But I guess when you're talking about, say, something like religious beliefs, or any kind of beliefs you have to make some sort of judgment. I mean, political beliefs, you have certain beliefs about the way the government should be or how it should be run or what the government should do. Which means you have to reject some kind of beliefs that are against what you think. If you think that the government should be, for sake of example, very limited and shouldn't be involved in a lot of stuff, then, you reject beliefs that would give the government a lot of power and have it involved in a lot of things, right? And you would vote for candidates that support that. You have to make some kind of cutoff in a way. Yeah, go ahead.
So, but like, who is he to determine what their salvation is?
What do you mean? How does it determine what their salvation?
Because you said something about salvation.
Yeah.
So, like, how? I don't get it.
Well, I think what he's saying is that it's unsatisfactory in the sense that it's unsure. It's
So
maybe not as secure as someone who is Christian.
So they have a religious belief that's not sincere.
Yeah, because from the Pope's perspective, it's not a true portrayal of what reality is. I think that's what's going on. Go ahead.
How does this, obviously, for most of this discussion, it's mainly been against religions that don't believe in Jesus. How does that relate to religions that do believe in Jesus, like Protestantism and
Good question. Yes. What is that? Yeah, because this is why I have this mainly geared towards to non-Christian religions, world religions. But yes, that's an excellent question because Vatican II did also have a statement on ecumenism which is a statement that was devoted to the relationship between Catholics and other Christians, not just Protestants, but also people who are Eastern Orthodox from usually from Eastern Europe and countries like that. They're Christians from Eastern Orthodox and stuff like that. Yeah, though, by their union in baptism, because they are believers in Christ, there is a conjoining, a connection. There are different, a person who is a believer in Christ, who's been baptized from the perspective of the Pope and the Catholic Church, is still not in a perfect situation because they're not fully united to the church, the community that Jesus intended. But they are connected. The word they use is conjoined, or they're separated brothers and sisters. Okay, but they're brothers and sisters in the faith, but there's still a separation. Why? Because there are different beliefs. Protestants have in some cases very different beliefs from Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox have different beliefs from Protestants and Catholics within Christianity. So there is that connection, and because they're joined by their belief in Jesus and this process of baptism called dunking in water, which they believe has spiritual power. The Catholic Church believes in spiritual power joining someone to Jesus and entering into the church. They are in some way connected to the church, and in a different situation, to say someone's a Hindu or a Buddhist who doesn't profess any belief in Jesus and never been baptized. Okay? So there's a difference in supernatural situation and the supernatural status of the person. I will say that it takes nothing away from the human dignity that a person has, Christian or non-Christian. It doesn't say anything like the person is loved less by God or that they have less value or dignity in their humanity. That's not what's going on here. It's talking about this relationship, this connection to God, and some are more fulfilling than others. This is going back to the analogy of philosophy. It's the same thing like if you follow a certain philosophy or a certain point of life. So why do you choose the one that you choose, the way you want to live your life? Because you find one path is more fulfilling than other paths. Maybe you tried other paths and you're like, I tried that way, it didn't work for me. Or it didn't give me what I wanted, but I'm doing this now and this works for me. It's kind of like the same way in regards to the sacred or ultimate reality. It's like a person might be, I was an atheist and it made sense for a while, but after a while it just didn't make sense anymore, and I started looking, and now maybe I'm more spiritual now. Maybe I'm not fully believing in a religion, but I'm looking, I do believe in something more supernatural, and that seems to be more fulfilling in my life. It gives me a different point of view. Some people have that perception. But it seems to me that the Pope is really kind of laying it on the line here. Maybe this is something you don't hear very often. Maybe if you're Catholic, maybe, I don't know if you ever heard this preached at your church or something. If the priest ever preached on this even. But, so I'm exposing you to it because this is university. You might never have heard this before. But this is the official position of the Catholic Church, that it is in a unique situation. But it's not necessarily the only situation that people find themselves in, because people have many ways in their search for God. Does there have to be a unique way to search for God? Do you think maybe the world's religions are actually willed by God from culture to culture, from society to society, from time period to time period, to draw people in? Do you agree that maybe Christianity is just one of those ways that God is drawing people in? Some people get hepped up about Jesus. Other people get excited about Vishnu. You know what I'm saying? Other people really like Bigfoot, Mr. Pratt. You're a squatcher? Go squatching? No? Still waiting for the smoking gun. I know the government has Bigfoot in Area 51. I know it. They got him in they're doing experiments on Bigfoot. Poor Bigfoot. No? All right. Well, if you don't laugh, you cry, Mr. Irvin. And I'm pretty close to crying. So I'm trying to get some discussion, but it's like pulling blood from a stone, Mr. Watkins. Yes? No? Okay.
Are you trying to say the religions
in contrary to what the Pope is saying, the Pope is arguing that No, Jesus is the way, and there's all religions. They're not on the same spiritual par with Christianity or the revelation that God has given in Jesus of Nazareth. But could you? Okay, go ahead.
Because if you look at it like this, like Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, although they call Allah like God, that's still their God at the end of the day. So that's like their culture. So I feel like it's not wrong. It's just they're adjusting to their own culture.
Okay, yeah. So do you think that's where religions come from? They're just they're cultural artifacts that people are building to deal with ultimate reality.
Yeah, and I feel like it comes to like a personal calling because like I believe in God and stuff, but like I think religion kind of like when I get like just because like when you look at the churches and like what goes on behind the scenes in churches and when you're actually aware of what's going on, it's kind of like how are you a priest but you're doing this and you're preaching this but you're not. So it's like at the end of the day I feel like your personal relationship with God is important. However, like you don't have to go through like these steps and like, you know, all that extra stuff that, like, not extra stuff, but like that Catholics and even Christians, like.
Sure. Okay. Well, there's a phrase, you know, don't show people how the sausage is made, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you see how the sausage is made, then you're kind of like, it might shake your faith. But yeah, so, because humans are obviously involved in religion. I mean, we're talking about the sacred, and people are claiming to have this experience with a power that's beyond the natural world. But you're dealing with human beings that make mistakes and do evil things and also good things. Yeah, that's interesting. So, do you think that what's something you said, Ms. Purnell, sparked my? I was listening to you, but it was something you said about. Just a question. I mean, do you think religions are maybe searches for truth and searches for reality? But do you think religions can kind of go off the rails and maybe are there religions that are maybe more in touch with the way the world really is than it really? Or excuse me, are more in touch with the way the world really is or not? Or are they all equally right or wrong? Or do you think like you can have a gradation or you can categorize like this seems to be more like what reality is like and this is less so and this is less so? Because I do. Because I don't know about you. I mean, the story I told you, Mr. Hanley, about Ganesh and his father, cutting off his head and sticking an elephant's head on him. I find that a little hard to believe, Whereas when I read some things in the Bible, like maybe a river parted open, okay, it's more possible I could believe that somehow there could be a naturalistic explanation for it, but revitalizing or bringing back to life a little kid's head by just putting an elephant head on him, and with all the with organ rejection and different, I don't know about that. It seems like that's less truthful about reality. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like that's really like not Christianity, but kind of because like the Bible has been passed down from like different traditions, so it's like. I don't know. For me, it's hard to believe that somebody didn't just write something in there that did not happen. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
Not just, like this has always been like a little conspiracy in my head. I'm not disrespecting anybody or anything, but like the Virgin Mary. Back then, in those days, if you think about it, if you were having sex and you weren't married, I guess like your family would be like damned or something like that. Yeah, shamed, banished, or whatever.
Well, they might kill you. Yeah,
exactly my point. So, say Mary was having sex, not married, and then lied. Like, not saying that's what happened, but that's how I think. You never know. Like, things can get twisted, so it's like.
Okay. No, that's interesting. That's an interesting point. Yeah, so it can be that element in religion. But remember, if it is a human search for God or for what the world is really like or what's going on, then that doesn't necessarily mean that people couldn't make up stories to try to explain what's going on. Like how did this woman suddenly get, pregnant when she says that she wasn't with anybody? Wink, wink. You know what I'm saying? So you write up a story that explains it. All right. Well, my thing's going on. Okay, so my alarm's going off. So okay, I'll let you go. God bless you all, and I'll see you next Tuesday, and we'll start talking about Hinduism. So. If you want to get an A for the course, you can bring some Indian food for Dr. Dunn. I'm just saying. No?
I gotta work.
Well, I've committed myself, Mr. Sullivan.
I mean, hey, let the record show.
All right, I make no promises, Mr. Sullivan. I'm recording here. I gotta backtrack.
Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank
Yeah. Thank you.
you. You're welcome. Have a good weekend. Have a good day, miss.